program. In case you're just joining us, it's time for us to start our conversation. We'll be speaking about multidimensional poverty, which, you know, let me just hold my fire. Hamzat Lawal is joining me right now. Hamzat Lawal is from Connected Development, the founder of Connected Development, yes, isn't it? Welcome, Hamzat, and good to have you on the program. Sambe is joining me from here. She's here also in Abuja, but she's joining me on Skype. Mata, are you there? And okay.
Yes.
Oh, Mata, hi. How are you? Okay, now the picture quality is better. Yes, yes. What's happening there, Mata? Are your bulbs going off and on?
No.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Mata, welcome to the program and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let me start with you, Mata. In fact, like I said at the beginning of the program, I've had series of conversations, series of opinions and comments on this table as regarding poverty. I've also expressed what I think that we should do concerning poverty. In fact, I've done series on poverty. In fact, for those that have watched me for a very long time now, at least in the last 2 years or so, if I am taking a stock of perhaps most of the issues that I've spoken about, poverty should be, if not number 1, number 2, or number 3. That is how dear it is to me in terms of seeking solutions to it. Your article on multidimensional poverty, UNDP report on multidimensional poverty, in fact, sparked a lot of concerns to those of us that have been speaking about poverty. Talk to me about what this multidimensional poverty means, really. Is it alarming, or would it also be that, oh, these people have come again, oh, they are scaring us, not just extreme poverty, but what is multidimensional poverty again?
Okay, so I think there's reason to be alarmed. Did I lose you?
Yes, go ahead, I can hear you.
Okay. I think there's reason to be alarmed because, you know, with multidimensional poverty, what essentially it's showing us is that there are more Nigerians living in depravity and deprivation, rather in deprivation, actually not depravity, in deprivation than we think. So multidimensional poverty takes into account other factors outside of, you know, money. So it takes into account things like access to decent healthcare. It takes into account access to education, access to good roads, sanitation, clean water, and, you know, electricity even is taken into account when you're talking about, you know, multidimensional poverty. So essentially, it's, for me, the reason to be alarmed is that, you know, we can tell ourselves that we're getting Nigerians out of poverty, but if their welfare, which, you know, is indicated by all of these things, you know, education, health, and sanitation, if their welfare does not show that, you know, they're better off than they were, then we're not doing anything at all. So I think there is reason to be concerned. And essentially that's what multidimensional poverty is. It is poverty as we know it, but then taking into account other things that affect the welfare of individuals. Okay. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, you're making sense. You're making sense. Now, let me come back to Hamzat to have his view. Just like Martha said, should we now begin to measure, or should we go beyond measuring poverty in monetary terms, actually? Hamzat.
Oh, definitely. And I would like to start by saying that we should be alarmed. In short, we should be scared. Worried, scared, and sick with the fact that we're not only talking about extreme poverty, but we're talking about multidimensional poverty. And I like how my sister have put this into simple terms. So for us, we need to, it's worrisome. And I want to start with healthcare, for instance. So when a poor person goes to the hospital, is he or she able to access healthcare services for free? That's no. So it means that, one, you're not only poor, and in this context, we're looking at living below $1 a day. And to put this in Naira, it depends on the exchange rate, but let's say 160 Naira a day. It means that a family...
That's more than that, not 360.
And not an individual. A family cannot even afford 360 Naira a day. So let's go to education. Do our kids have access to quality and timely education. Or let's even drop quality. Do they have access to timely education? Today, we have over 10 million children that are out of school, roaming the street of Nigeria. 10 million in Nigeria. So it tells you, and when we talk about the future of this great country, how are we investing in that future? Let's go to water, sanitation, and hygiene. Over 60 million people openly defecate. Let me try to put this into simple time, and apologies to the viewers. It means 60 million people shit outside. They don't have toilet facility.
Yes.
So what this tells you is, if we have an epidemic today in Nigeria, Nancy, all of us are living dead.
You know that I saw something, was it last week, was it on Twitter or so, or a write-up I was reading, that, I'm sorry, but I need to say it, that some of our police barracks are avenues now for epidemics.
Oh, yes.
Because the way they are constructed and the way they are dirty. Perhaps the police people won't like me, or some will like me because you won't come out and say it yourself. I'm saying it for you.
Remember there was a report.
Do you understand what I'm trying
It's on the
to
internet,
say?
one of the cantonments in Lagos.
Yes.
That the toilet facility is dilapidated.
Yes.
Why are we even going to police? Let's go to federal government girls' colleges across the country. When you go, even our public facilities, when you talk about hospitals, you talk about schools, and you can, even marketplace, you can't use the toilet facilities. So this is deeply entrenched in our society today, and we should all be worried. Because even if you think you're part of the political elite, you cannot run away once there is an epidemic. Imagine if we have an airborne disease flying around. It means that even if you're in the secure environment, you cannot control the air. So this should be in. I was even thinking that when the report came out by UNDP, the government would declare a state of emergency on poverty in Nigeria. And see, Nancy, we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goal, looking at the trajectory from the Millennium Development Goal. Even if we know that we have 11 years to achieve, how are we on the pathway to ensure? Because you cannot achieve even the goal that talks about zero hunger if you don't deal with poverty, when a family and household cannot even generate 360 naira a day.
Now, Martha, Hamzat is trying to give us a human face to it, because Hamzat does a lot of community and grassroots work. In fact, interacts with a lot of those people on a daily basis.
Yes.
But let me put it this way. Just like Hamzat said, is it that he did actually say now that he was expecting the government to declare a state of emergency on, oh, guys, they're saying we are into multidimensional poverty. And like I said earlier, by 2050, according to the data, that Nigeria and DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, 40% of the world's poor. What I mean is that 40% of the poorest people in the world will just come from two countries, and those two countries are Nigeria and DRC. With that kind of data, that the Nigerian government is not alarmed or perhaps disturbed, is it that these data are just alarming data, or they just want to say something about Nigeria? Or perhaps those of us in the media, or those of us that are propagating, oh, guys, listen to this. Please pay attention to this. Let's seek solutions to this. Are we also part of the problem in terms of, oh, they've started again, not them? Or perhaps it's about politics this time?
I think that because I'm not really political, but I don't think it's necessarily about politics. I think people are just paying attention to, things that are not, I don't know why, do not pertain to this data that the UNDP, perhaps we've heard it so many times. Just last year, like I quoted in the article, just last year, it was announced that we're the poverty capital of the world, and the response was similar to what we're getting now that we've found out, that there are as many Nigerians, as 98 million in multidimensional poverty. So I think it's also a cultural thing. We have this culture of, not responding to things like this. So I think it goes beyond it being political, and it's a shame, really, because these are people that you and I know. It's not random people. It's people. It's real people. And Hamzat said something about going to the hospital and not getting medical treatment. I've been working for myself for a year. So before I got health insurance, I had this eye problem, and I went to the general hospital at Asokoro. you know, and I couldn't even get an eye doctor to look at me. There was a waiting line for at least 3 months. So imagine if somebody came with an emergency and needed, you know, emergency care. Perhaps they would have made concessions for such a person. But I'm inclined to think that, you know, there are people who go back defeated, you know, and, you know, who cannot afford private care. So it's real people, Nancy. It's real people. And the fact that the people in power are not alarmed and not concerned about this is actually a point to, you know, to hide our faces in shame, because, you know, they are the people who can steer Nigeria in towards a different direction. And, you know, that, you know, nobody is responding to this is really quite shameful. And I think it is beyond politics at this point, and people in the media, and I think, you know, people in civil society also have responsibility to make as much noise about this as possible. We all have to be involved, because it's not, you know, it's not just numbers. It's people we know. You know, I can count people that I know that are affected by, you know, that are deprived on at least one dimension of this multidimensional poverty or the other. So, and I'm sure you and Hamzat as well can think of people who are suffering, you know, things that they shouldn't be suffering only because our system is not working. And, you know, the lack of response also shows a failure on the part of the system. You know, it shows, you know, how inefficient, you know, our people are in their leadership. And it's really embarrassing, Nancy. I think it's embarrassing that nobody's responding to this.
Now, if we take a look at the plethora or the list of government policies aimed at defeating poverty, not just with this administration, perhaps during the, I think it even translates, or it goes beyond even when we started democracy. But let's take it from even when we started democracy. Operation Feed the Nation during democracy, even Housing for All, 2020 Vision, NAPEP, you know, CCT now, conditional cash transfer, you win, the N-Power, a lot of it that government has put in place. And let me also say that this administration did say, I think some weeks ago, that 5 million people, 5 million Nigerians have been lifted out of poverty. The question now is, why is there failure around government policies targeting poverty? Why?
So let me start with the 500 billion for social intervention. So the conditional cash transfer, which is part of the 500 billion, and my organization oversaw monitoring in about 4 or 5 states in Nigeria. I remember when we visited one of the southeastern states. I want to share a story of a 70-year-old grandmother. And when she came to collect her 5,000 naira, first, some people came with Ghana must go. You know, when we talk about poverty, some people think...
people came
some people came with Ghana must go because in their lifetime, they've never seen 5,000 naira before. So they thought it was a huge amount of money, so they needed Ghana must go to come and collect 5,000 naira.
In this country?
I say in the southeast. Then she came, she was given 5,000. She started crying. 5,000. So some people told us that was the first time they were seeing 1,000 naira notes. And these are people that are above 60 years. But particularly, this grandmother had diabetes. All her children are late, and she couldn't feed for herself. And she told us that this 5,000 naira is what survives her, that she used this money to buy her diabetes medication and to feed. And you know, diabetes patients, they have a diet that they have to stick to. But then I thought about it. Over 50% of the 5,000 goes to medication for this woman. Are we really helping our grandmothers and mothers out of poverty in the grassroots? When we talk about social investment, I was excited when I heard about the 500 billion. But what is it that we need to provide? We need to provide social safety nets. Why not ensure that this grandmother can access free and quality health care? She can get coupon to access food.
You're getting emotional. Please don't.
Because when you travel, I think that we have...
Don't make me start crying.
I think that we have lost
already.
it in the sense that when we watch, or maybe because we have access to television and a bit of electricity and internet, and we think that we're all disconnected. When you travel just 2 hours away from Abuja, let's even go to Niger State. So for me, if we want to get it right, let your citizens be able to access quality health care. Look at the Obamacare. This is not rocket science. And I think we need to start asking questions. What is our NHIS doing for us? What are they doing?
Just about 6 to 8% of Nigerians are covered.
And let me tell you something, Nancy. It has to do with politics. Let's not shy away from it. Why is it that citizens are calm and watching that this is going on in Nigeria? I'll tell you. Over 70 million people are illiterate in this country. So what this means is, even our voting force, let's tell ourselves the truth, even our voting force do not even know how to decide for themselves. If you hear that over 90 million people are poor, you know what it tells you? Now let's calculate within ourselves. It means that, Nancy, as you are, you're thinking for over 50 people. Because when they're poor, the only thing they think about is their next meal. Where would their next meal come from? If your citizens do not have roof over their head, they cannot afford clothing, they can't afford healthcare, they can't afford to drink water, they can't afford to go to school or get healthcare service. What else is left? And this is about dignity. It's about dignity. So again, when we even look at the crisis around the world and how the world leaders even look at Nigeria, we're not dignified. They look at us and treat us anyhow. Why do you think there's xenophobic attack in South Africa? All of this is connected. Why? Your government do not take you serious. Why would the international community take you serious when people are dying just from giving birth? I want to share another story in Imo State. I met a woman that gave birth on a wheelbarrow. And this woman's healthcare service, her primary healthcare center, had a budget of 18 million naira. Where did the money go to? This is an oil-producing state that beyond federal government allocation, they also get derivation. Are we really asking the right questions? And are we putting people into power that have conscience to ensure that they deliver on their campaign promises?
No, Hamzat, let me just give you a break to calm down, because it's such an emotional. Sometimes, even as journalists, they say you try as much as possible to detach yourself. But when we talk about issues like this, they're very, very emotional, because poverty, like they say, is not a number. It has a human face. Poor people are existing here in the country. But Martha, let me come to you now. Perhaps what we've seen over the years has been the perpetual plunge into the cycle of poverty, really. Is the culture that we have, is it also perpetuating poverty? If you take a look at it, perhaps in most families, you can just say one or two people. In fact, most times it's always one person is the breadwinner in most families. If the breadwinner dies, like Hamzat was saying, the story he was giving about the grandmom that he saw in the Southeast, all her children dead, no one to really take care of her. What happens in some civilized or some sane climes? The government or the state should take care of that woman eventually. What is this cycle of poverty that Nigerians continue to plunge into? And for us to also state it, that what we're talking about did not just start today, really, but perhaps it has come to the forefront today more, that is really staring us in the face. What do you have to say about that?
Okay, I think it's interesting you mentioned, this culture of poverty, and it is actually, it's a research niche where, and I've written an article about it, where it's poverty, breeds more poverty, essentially, So people who are born into poor families are less likely to escape poverty than people who are born into wealthy families. So in short, poverty breeds poverty. So there is a cycle of poverty in Nigeria, but it's ironic because Nigeria is also a resource-rich nation, and not just in natural resources. Nigerians are brilliant. Nigerians are really brilliant people, but we have not had a consistent. We have not had consistent investment in people and in human capital, essentially. So we have not consistently, and invested well in education. We have not consistently invested well in healthcare. And these are, these are two key points. And then other things too. But, if you give people good education, if you give them, healthcare, good healthcare, chances are they can pursue their goals in such a way that, the country, their lives, are improved because you've empowered them by giving them, the resources they need to go out there and make a living. And they're not bothered about their health. They're not bothered about, airborne diseases or epidemics, that might affect them and cripple them. And then there's also the added issue of, security. It's like Nigerians are failing on that part. And all of these weave together to perpetuate the circle. So we haven't, what we're looking at now is just, a culmination of years and years of not investing properly in Nigeria.
Now, the question matter would be, since we have this cycle of poverty, is this, what do they call that wheel? Ferris wheel, is it? Or let me say, this cycle of poverty, yes. How do we now truncate this cycle of poverty? Since if you're born into a poor family, there is that big chance, or there's a bigger chance. Martha, I'm still sticking with you. There is still that bigger chance of you still being poor. In fact, it's also a thing of pride sometimes that, oh, your father was a palm wine tapper. It's not that, your father was a palm wine tapper, you're still going to be that palm wine tapper. You will see that the children are palm wine tappers. How about, why can't we even create a system that palm wine tapper in the village can begin to process even that palm tree to get other things and sell, and the palm wine tapper becomes, a bit not impoverished, but can take adequate care of the family. So how do we truncate this vicious cycle of poverty?
Nancy, people need opportunities, People need to be given opportunities. And how do you give opportunity to, for instance, the son of the palm wine tapper? You present him with options, And I'm very passionate about education, and so I think, one of such ways to give opportunities to people is to provide them education. And to be honest, Nigeria has provided education for its people, but the problem is the education is not quality education. Yes. Our teachers are not even well trained, and some of them are not. There aren't even sufficient teachers to begin with, and then even where we have teachers, they're not well trained, so they're not really teaching. They're not teaching very well. They're not teaching their pupils very well. But in a society that works, and in a place where things work properly, it'd be a matter of giving people opportunities to do things differently. So you want to take somebody out of poverty, out of a circle of poverty. You have to do things differently, and and I think that's another problem. We've been doing the same things and hoping for different results. We're not going to get different results if we keep, repeating the same projects and, spending money the same way we've been doing. We need to become strategic in providing opportunities for people. We need to think deeply about, our context as Nigerians, and in fact, the context might differ from, region to region. And look at, for instance, the people in the southwest or southeast. Look at, their peculiar situation. How can you and think deeply about how you can provide opportunities for people in that place? And it could be different for the people in the south. What is their situation? How can you? So it's like in the south, you might, invest in engineering, because they have the oil and all of that. And in the north or in the northeast or northwest, you might invest agriculture, for instance. So it's about giving people options and giving them opportunity to better themselves. And this is how, we can, truncate the circle of poverty. And we can only do this if we have leaders who are willing to, do what is right, Like I said, we have the resources, we have the money, we have the intelligence, we have the brilliance, we have people in leadership positions who control these resources. And unfortunately, it's a small circle of them, and a lot of them have been there for a long time. And they also help in perpetuating this cycle of poverty. So from from up above, we need to do things differently, and from the grassroots, when we're providing solutions, we need to think differently and strategically about the solutions we're providing to people.
I like this dimension which you're bringing in, which I've always propagated on the program, in terms of what you're saying. If I'm going to summarize it, is perhaps have a Nigerianized model for fighting this poverty. Since all the solutions that government have put in place in the past few years has not been working, even though it's been working in other places. For example, like Bolsa Familia in Brazil, which I've analyzed a few times on the show, giving cash handouts to families, helped lift people out of poverty in Brazil. China has also done the same, lifting over 700 million people out of poverty. But the CCT and co we're seeing here, government has said have lifted 5 million people out of poverty in the last 3 years, which is not enough. Because we're not just talking of extreme poverty now, we're talking of multidimensional poverty. Still talking about the solutions. And I like the dimension you came where you came from in terms of looking strategically. I like that word, strategic thinking, because the way this country is right now, we need strategic thinkers, not same old thinkers. If you go like what Mata has said, you go to the Southeast, trade, this here concept that has been acclaimed all over the world is, the apprenticeship kind of thing. And it's also dwindling, I must say, now, perhaps because of education or what have you. What should government do? As we are speaking now, ministers, they are meeting with the president in the villa. What other strategic things should they come up with? Just like Mata has said. Do you have other things to say?
Oh, yes. I think that first, and I even like how Mata have put this into context, but let's look at homegrown solution. So what is it that we have as natural resources in our various regions? I also think that some of our policies, and I want to start with the 2007 Mining Act. How can we also ensure that states and communities take ownership of what they have in terms of natural resources? And let's have a strong natural governance. I remember when the 2010 mining crisis happened in Zamfara that killed over 400 children. And for me, when I visited this community, this is simple. You have local miners that don't speak English. Because sometimes also, as much as, and when we talk about education, and for me as a development worker, I'm not talking only about formal education. I'm talking about informal education and skill. Because that's what human capital development is about. Give people skill set so that they can meet 21st and 22nd century development challenges. Why can't we send some of these artisans to go to local institutions that would have faculties that they teach them in local Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, where they now get certificates after undergoing 3 to 6 months training program. Afterwards, this certificate, you can use it to get government license to maybe mine. With that license and this certificate, you can access loan or credit from any financial institute. And this is where CBN or industrial bank can play a role. So that people that are poor, that don't have collateral, all you have to do is go through this 3-6 month institute, you get trained, and you're not getting theoretical knowledge, you're getting practical knowledge, hands-on, how to mine, how to ensure that you don't use mercury and contaminate the environment. And then with your certificate and your certificate, and then when you get the license, you get credit or you get grant. Mind you, government would be the one to even win out of this, because it's a win-win for everyone, but government would be the one to benefit more. Why? Government will be able to effectively regulate. Beyond regulation, government would get royalty and tax from this, and then can reinvest the money to ensure they provide safety nets in terms of healthcare, education, and access to water and sanitation for citizens. And what this also means is the money would remain in the economy, it will remain in the system. There's an inequality report that was released by Oxfam. It shows that the inequality gap is widening. It shows that only 5 people in Nigeria have a wealth of our 2017 budget, over $27 billion. Only 5 people have that money. Again, it's not only for government. We need to also understand that the private sector have a key role to play. Why is it that the private sector is investing and taking and clearing this money and taking it back to other climes? again, I understand that they want political will and they want enabling environment, but I think that the private sector have to ensure that the monies that are in Europe, that are in Swiss, Nigerian money, let us come and invest here. Let's have industries. Let's build industries. Let's create value. Let's create wealth. Because if we do this, my sister talked about the security challenge. You know that is also tied to poverty. Because when people are poor, they would go the extra mile to fend for themselves and their family.
And even the people that have farms and all of that, that can't go because of the insecurity challenge, you continue to perpetuate poverty. But we have just about 2 minutes to the end of the show. Let's take a few comments from our viewers and on Twitter, for those that have joined the conversation. Ngozi Ebubedike says, poverty has been an immemorial cry. The way out begins with the mindset of whomever sees him or herself as poor. Okay, Udo Joseph says, our government, Islam and Christianity promote and sustain poverty. Until these institutions are questioned in Nigeria, poverty will continue to thrive. While Hillary, Hope says, interesting, wish I could speak about it. I term it as systemic poverty, enabled and certified by the system. Hillary said, the poverty levels in Nigeria is endemic and extremely worrisome. The government of the day needs a proactive and far-reaching approach to really lifting millions of Nigerians out of poverty. The earlier we realize the evils of extreme poverty, the better for us all. Ambi says on Twitter, Nancy, Money Line with Nancy today was really emotional. Very emotional.
Yeah.
Very. You can't talk about these issues and not, and not be emotional sometimes, because sometimes perhaps we need to attach emotions to this thing so that we get the problem sorted. But Martha, are you still there? Let me just have your concluding remarks in just a few seconds, Martha. I know we said it. We've really said it. What else is? Yes, but Martha, can you just give me your concluding remarks? Is she still there so that she can tell us goodbye? So what's your concluding remarks in just 15 seconds?
Okay, we need to do better. We need to do things differently, and we need to hold our leaders accountable. We cannot sleep on this issue.
Thank you, Martha. Hamzat?
For me, it's about the girl child. What this means is if you're born into a poor family, there's every chances that 60% of girls that are born into poor families would not go to school. And what this simply means is they will be married as children and taken into adulthood. So it's important that we see this from that part, because there's a saying that when you educate a boy, you educate a boy. But when you educate a girl, you educate the nation. And our nation is at the backdrop of the girls when they get educated.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us today.